Len and Duncan, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and talk about, what is it you guys do and what's your background?
My name is Len Ber.
Yeah.
I'm formerly a physician from the USSR, from the former USSR. I specialized in. I was a medical doctor, specialized in endocrinology. Came over here in '93 to work for a pharmaceutical company and in the area of my research. And then I was prepared to get licensed in the States, but things on the business side took over, and I stayed on the business side, and currently working in the regulatory field for a company in Chicago area. U.S. naturalized citizen, married, and been target of directed energy weapons since 2019.
Since 2019?
Yeah, in the summer of 2019.
3 years ago.
Just over 3 years ago, it started happening to me. And was diagnosed in 2020 with vestibular dysfunction due to directed energy exposure by the same team of experts that diagnosed Cuban diplomats.
Duncan?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I have an Ivy League background, education, and I've been studying and human rights activism for what is now currently termed Havana Syndrome, but this has been going on for quite some time. I worked for DARPA on projects for the CIA, for the Navy, for example, wrote the Artificial Intelligence Code, tracked the Soviet nuclear submarine fleet. But about 20 years ago, I realized some of my research was being utilized on my own citizens, and that was unacceptable to me. And since then, I've done hundreds of interviews, interviewed 2,500 victims or targeted individuals, as they're called, found commonalities of all their stories. And I've spoken to with the head of the LA FBI, to the Senate Intelligence Committee, 23 senators and representatives, with some interest. And I said, just wait when it starts happening to their agents, diplomats, and the FBI. So interestingly, a story came out yesterday that it's happening to the FBI now.
What is your educational background?
I have an MBA from Dartmouth, a Master's of Science from Harvard, PhD in Applied Sciences, Computer Science, Artificial Intelligence, pre-medical in engineering, and other classes from Stanford, Duke, and MIT. So yeah, I've been in school most of my life.
And how did you get into working with DARPA and the CIA?
It was odd. I gave a resume to a headhunter, ironically, and they're called headhunters, and my head was taken for a CIA think tank. At the time, I didn't know it. It was a technology think tank, and it was all funded by DARPA. And then I got shuffled around as a scientist to these various other projects.
For people who aren't familiar, could you tell us what DARPA is?
Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. They do all of the pie in the sky projects, long-term, well-funded. I have some of the best scientists, and it's mainly where all the top secret research goes on. And that some of it I can talk about, some of it I can't. And it's a very fine line. I'm not trying to hurt my country. I'm not trying to hurt anyone here. But there is a cover-up going on about the Havana Syndrome. And so this is what we're hoping Len and I to expose today.
So when did you guys meet each other? And how did you guys meet?
So after I was diagnosed with Havana Syndrome by Dr. Hoffer at the University of Miami, I started reaching out to elected officials, to all the researchers. One of the people I contacted gave me Robert's book, Soulcatcher, Project Soulcatcher. I read it, and I said, I have to meet this guy. And I contacted him on social media and made a trip. I live in the Chicago area, just about 45 minutes from downtown, and contacted Robert, said, asked to fly to meet him, and we flew to Idaho and spent the day talking, and I learned a lot about it, and I continue learning from Robert. We became friends, and we have common goal to expose this.
So how did you first develop this syndrome? What was happening? What were you doing? You were a civilian. You weren't working in the government
Right.
in any capacity. So how does this happen to a civilian?
It just started happening. I developed tinnitus, the ring in the ear, first at like in certain parts of the house, and I heard noises and voices, and I could not figure out, and then vibrations. These vibrations experientially, it's like nothing else. There's no neurological disorder that feels like that. And I can tell you, as a patient and as a physician, experientially, it is very distinct. Your whole body vibrates. Your head is heavy pressure. The sound is deafening. You get disoriented. Can't walk. Can't talk. It incapacitates you, and it can last from 10 minutes to 30 minutes to an hour and a half, and it's very painful. It's very uncomfortable, and it feels like concussion. After that, and you actually have symptoms of concussion, the movement of the eyes, nystagmus, and this is why some people give it the name immaculate concussion. But it was escalating. I was searching for an answer. I had convulsions from it, which is one of the things that people experience. I realized how serious it was. Neurologists were unable to diagnose. I started looking through the literature, found paper by Dr. Hoffer where he describes 25 diplomats that he examined and diagnosed with what he called acquired neurosensory dysfunction. And that's the diagnosis that he gave to these diplomats, and he gave this diagnosis to me. But my attacks did not happen overseas. They happened domestically in my house. And I traveled and stayed at hotels, went to other states, and it was happening there too. So it's just not one location. And it escalated. Then I was diagnosed with traumatic encephalopathy, basically like post-traumatic brain syndrome. But there's no injury. There's no concussion. This is not a type of injury where you have mechanical trauma.
Right.
This is energy. This is what they call non-kinetic weaponry. And this is how we met.
why would somebody like you be targeted? What were you doing? Were you dealing with other people in government or diplomats, or do you have any reason to suspect that somebody would target you with something like this?
None. I have no idea why I was chosen to be targeted, and I keep no government secrets. I never worked for a government. I don't know what the reason is, and I'm not doing it. So perhaps people who do it to me would know the answer.
So is this something that you believe happened to you one time and it had like a lasting residual effect? Or do you think this is something that happened, you were targeted by some sort of weapon or something multiple times?
Multiple times on ongoing basis. I just had 2 attacks this morning before I got on the plane. These are active attacks. And experientially, they feel exactly the same. The vibrations, all the symptoms are the same. And not only that, I have a brain scan that I did in April and did in October. So in 6 months, what this Havana Syndrome is also described as brain connectivity disorder. So it disrupts connectivity between neural nodes within the brain. And I have these broken connections, these called delta waves, that you only supposed to have it during deep sleep. And I have them all over, and these are basically non-functional connections between neural nodes. And since April to October of this year, I have 20% more. There's no degenerative neurological disorder that behaves that like that. This is a very fast progress, and because I'm having these daily active attacks. These are not functional episodes. These are active attacks that make me vibrate, make me disoriented. They're extremely painful. Sometimes I just have to go to the basement and scream in the pillow. It's extremely debilitating. I've been on medical leave for the last year, and it's hard for me to do any cognitive work. I work when I can.
So when you say it's actively happening, so you think that this is being something that's controlled, or do you think it is something that just has an effect that lasts over a long period of time and it happens sporadically at random times?
I think that these are active attacks. These are not residual. These are not functional episodes.
So their episodes are not random.
No, they're random. I can't predict when they're gonna happen. They can happen. It can wake me up in the middle of the night. It can happen.
There's no pattern.
There's no pattern. When you listen to neuroweapon experts that warn us about these attacks, they call them intentional. So these are intentional attacks. These are not, the brain does not produce them. There's a school of thought that these are functional neurological disorder, but in fact, the brain injury from these energy attacks are classified as organic. So there's a damage to the brain. So to answer this question scientifically would take somebody to measure that energy coming into my brain, but the detection methods in the intelligence reports are classified. So I can't tell you that this energy is coming in because I'm not measuring it. Nobody is measuring, nobody is investigating it. But I guarantee you these are active attacks. I'm the biggest skeptic. I'm scientifically minded. I have no doubt that these are active attacks.
There was a recent documentary on CNN, Immaculate Conception, where the doctor who was investigating, who was CIA, came down with the same symptoms. So it's kind of interesting. The doctors they hired that they are not even allowed to know.
Talk directly into that thing.
That they do not even know that we've been working on the same weapons, directed energy weapons, often referred to as mind control weapons. Chinese are working on them. The Russians and U.S. have had them for a long time. But dial-in lethality that is what's happening oftentimes for those that show mild traumatic brain injury. It can be done through cavitation effects using sound waves, highly unlikely in the Cuban embassy attacks. And it can be done through microwave directed energy if it's amplified. In fact, there's something called the Frey effect. The Army had it on their website called V2K, and that's how a lot of people refer to it, that can pipe voices into someone's head. You can't plug your ears. It actually vibrates the brain, which is like many concussions, through the small pulses that expand the tissue and then contracts it, then goes to the inner ear where they can hear it. If you just turn that up, it causes brain damage. You're heating the brain. So there are a lot of ways, and a weapon, for example, that I think is reclassified now, but it was done at the University of Nevada as a non-lethal weapon that resonates the dopamine cells of your brain, producing cells of your brain, and it floods it. Now, it worked. The Air Force reclassified it.
Flood your brain with dopamine?
Yeah, dopamine dump. And that incapacitates the adversary in a non-lethal way. Not totally non-lethal, though. If you have too much neurotransmitter in your brain, it's a neurotoxin. It'll also cause brain damage. So brain damage can occur through these weapons that are non-lethal in many different ways.
Do you have any way of describing, or is there any evidence anywhere that could explain something that's happening, like to describe what Len is describing is happening to him? Is there any sort of weapon that you're aware of that can do that?
Sure. It's very complex. But if you cognitively model someone, you have a brain print, like a fingerprint. And if you use autocorrelation techniques, and there's a way, and we'll just kind of wave our hand, functional MRI that you can do at a distance over the earth, you have every human being's brain pattern. You can control 8 billion brains on the planet, potentially read them. Pre-crime, I mean, you can imagine during warfare, it'd be useful for a number of objectives. So in that situation, you'd want it continuous, and you'd beam the entire earth over it. You're like a cell phone. Your brain is a circuit. So if you're dialed in, once you have a cognitive model, you would never be able to escape it under the magnetosphere or ionosphere. It's worldwide. And you can ask, a number of people in every country, is it happening in your country? And they're just like the exact same symptomology.
Other than the symptomology and the vast amount of people in government and so forth that experience these same symptoms, what other evidence do we have of technology like this?
Well, I sent you some articles and papers. There are just many books. You can go on Google. The difference between, I just don't believe these diplomats are being hit and by a drive-by microwave weapon. I think the brain damage is being done because the brain rewires itself more rapidly. Let's say if you lose your eyesight, then your hearing and taste, smell, your taste and smell get better. Your brain adapts faster. During this adaptation process, you can insert an external signal, sort of like hiving brains together.
Insert an external signal.
Yes, an electromagnetic signal. And how would you do that, you might ask? And the details get very complex. But there are several patents that you can access that talk about inserting a signal into the microcircuits and macrocircuits of the brain. Now, you got to know those patterns, the lock and key mechanism. Otherwise, it won't affect you. It will only affect the target brain if the brain print fits.
The brain print.
Yes, signature. Everyone has a unique one. And you ask, well, how do you broadcast this over the world? How do we talk to nuclear submarines underwater?
How do you explain this is happening to Len? How do you rationalize it?
I can, because one, it follows the symptomology, like I said, of all these others. Right. But for me, I don't know if he wants me to mention this. Let me ask him in private. Hold on.
Okay, yeah.
Can I talk? Here's how I do my studies, and I wanted to find the commonalities, but I have to throw away the ones I'm uncertain about that are true targets. You know, maybe there's natural schizophrenia, there's a whole bunch of chemical imbalances,
right,
et cetera.
Right.
These weapons can actually induce and mimic all those diseases and effects. But the conversations, the scripts, they're called, are always the same. I've heard them all. They're slightly tailored for each individual, but they're scripts. And they're meant to confuse the very derogatory. That's just typical breakdown. If you've ever been to boot camp, you're a worm until you're part of the team. And why would you want to break down the ego of that person? To rebuild it. So this gets into creating Manchurian candidates, split personality spies, and information couriers, people that will carry messages to other places without being aware that they're actually doing it. So you can imagine the misperception that is caused by this. And a lot of people, the targets, when they're interviewed, are tricked into believing evil aliens have abducted their brains, demons.
They're tricked.
Yes.
How are they tricked? Pardon this brief interruption, but I want to take a minute to talk about this incredible supplement that I've been using for over a year now, after it was recommended to me by nutritional scientist Dr. Dominic D'Agostino on this podcast. I take Dom's advice when it comes to anything related to nutrition, diet, and longevity, because as we get older, these things become more and more important. That is why I started using Verso. Verso is a company that is dedicated to translating scientific breakthroughs into products that hold the potential to increase longevity. I take Cell Being, this one right here, which contains nicotinamide mononucleotide, or NMN-based supplement, paired with naturally derived micronized trans resveratrol and TMG. These two chemicals are actually precursors to what's called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is commonly known as NAD. And NAD is essentially the precursor to energy, cell repair, and longevity. If you've ever tried fasting or even intermittent fasting, and you've gotten that feeling of super high energy or mental clarity, it's because your body is activating these genes called sirtuins, which are actually longevity genes. The downside is as we age, NAD declines. When I found out I could naturally increase my body's activation of sirtuins and naturally activate my body's production of NAD, I was sold. And it is so much more affordable than doing NAD IV drips. Head on over to ver.me concrete.so and use the coupon code concrete at checkout to save 15% on your entire order. That's KONCRETE at checkout and get 15% off your entire order, or you can just go to ver.so/KONCRETE. It's linked below. Back to the show.
They're told.
By who?
By the voices, the V2K. So they'll say, we're the Russian government, we're the Chinese government, we're evil aliens, we're Satan's, satanic ritual abuse. And I've heard all the stories. One guy believed it was some 14-year-old kid with an Xbox that lived next door. The trickery really is that great when you're under hypnosis that people will believe something other than a massive government could do this. And so anyway, my interview with Len, he very well described a typical breakdown script that's used on almost all the TI victims. TI stands for targeted individuals. Some of them are pretty crazy. They have names like Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, and those are the confusion tactics. And when they're breaking down the ego of the human through all the pains and tortures and the verbal breakdown, these are typical CIA torture scripts. I mean, Kubark manual. And they do good cop, bad cop interrogation called Jeff and Mutt, and they go right through the list, right? Just textbook. So whoever the handlers are on the other side of this synthetic telepathy, they're following the handbook perfectly, and they've been trained.
But why Len?
And everyone asks that. Why me? Every target. So sometimes they come up, I cut some important guy off in traffic. He put me on a list, or it's my ex-husband, or something like that. Obviously, if you work for government, you're just like, well, obviously it's the government. But right. You want a random sample of the population in all languages, all cultures, in order for a worldwide weapon of an AI system that can interact with every human brain. For example, when you if you develop a new drug, well, you have a control group, and then you give the placebo, and then you have the actual drug experiment in order to do a double-blind study. Right. So why me? I'm nobody. Well, that's exactly probably why they chose you.
Right, but if they're doing some sort of an experiment like this and testing him, how would they gather information? How would they know about Len's symptoms and know how Len is feeling? How would they know it's working?
You want to answer that?
Yeah, I believe that there is it's a two-way, bidirectional connection. And once again, it's called remote neural monitoring and intervention. There are patents around it. Plus, the medical information that I produce is probably very relevant to them if it is, in fact, human experimentation without consent, which violates Nuremberg, Geneva Convention, every human right. But that's a speculation on my part because I'm not the one doing it. It's been done to me, and I don't know why. I don't know who is doing it, what the purpose is. I can only speculate.
And let me interject here. So a lot of the, a few of the targets were true Manchurian candidates. I tried to speak with Senator Clinton at the time. She wouldn't talk to us. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up to her is because someone was hearing her voice, ventriloquism, and they believed she was the one torturing them. And that's how you program, they're called programmed assassins. And I thought she might be interested in that. And so if you're programming someone to go after, let's say, a political target, all you have to do is use voice morphing and pipe in the tortures, the pains, and 24 hours, make it a artificial intelligent chatterbot too. And you'll drive the person crazy, and they'll want to kill and stop the pain of the target, which they'll go after that person, be it their neighbor, be it a lot of these school shootings. I think that you hear about on the news. They hear voices, and the news, the mass news media will just write them out. Oh, they're crazy.
There's a story apparently about people seeing a white van, or what, let me just ask you this. What do the people who claim that Havana Syndrome is like some fake thing that's like created by schizophrenics or whatever, talking about crazy things, what sort of arguments are they making?
They're using a pseudoscience that's kind of a tautology of psychiatry. If we find an abnormality in a person, we then classify it, and then it becomes a disease, a mental illness. Now, the problem with that is if we're trying to hide a very sophisticated weapon, one that actually targets the mind, there's no way to use that model of science to explain it. You immediately are discrediting it. You're being a skeptic. You're not finding the alternative hypotheses. So the people that say these things, one, it hasn't been done to them. They haven't worked on the weaponry. They haven't done their research. And it's a kind of a lazy mind. They just rather say everyone's crazy, mass delusion, they think the sky is falling, etc. And that's just, I don't, since I know they exist, and I've studied this for 20 years and worked on portions of it, I have very bad things to say about those people.
Now, when you worked on programs for DARPA and the CIA, what sort of you worked on neurotechnology? Is that right?
Again, we're getting into a fine line about my background, what I talk about, but EEG controlled robots, was a project, robotic surgery and medicine, voice identification and morphing technologies, natural language processing, signal intelligence of tanks from satellites, things like that. But I can't talk directly about too much about the very details of the advanced sensors and systems involved, if you can appreciate that.
Well, some of the greatest innovation in technology obviously comes from war and the military industrial complex. Are there any positive aspects of neurotechnology and this type of technology that are being utilized or that are being developed?
Oh, absolutely. If you go throughout history, all technologies are neutral. Fire can cook food, kill bacteria, keep you warm, but it can burn down villages. So the war machine will almost always use it first for their advantage and keep it as secret as possible. It's a great interrogation tool. Imagine having bloodless wars where you just fatigue your enemy and they drop to their knees. We use the voice to skull and LDAR, long range acoustic device, in the Gulf War to say this is all lay down your arms, and they believed it.
So what is that? Can you explain exactly what that is? The LRAD?
LRAD is a sonic long range acoustic weapon. The V2K is a microwave weapon. You can't plug your eardrums. You can't stop the sound.
It conducts straight to your brain.
Yeah, and it makes it sound like it's coming, the sound or voice or music or whatever you want to play is coming right from the center of your head. So it works pretty well in war, and you can imagine other effects. You're getting brutalized, beaten up, all virtual. And The brain damage, unfortunately, they're going to have to work on that. But otherwise, you can literally traumatize an entire population. Okay, so are those good effects rather than guns? Perhaps. But there are other good effects. Imagine once the civilians have use of this, like Elon Musk's Neuralays, you can have more control of yourself. I feel like I want to be happy today, or I want to have a communication with you without using a phone. So synthetic telepathy is really around the corner. We have to get the messaging infrastructure working.
What are your thoughts on Elon Musk's Neuralink? What is your outlook on that?
I think he's going to be set up as a patsy for a lot of this experimentation that's going on in the public. I've already seen it happening. Targeted individuals are very angry. They want to point the finger at somebody. He's the perfect person to point the finger at. He's a rich man, so he's already suspect in some people's minds, even though this technology is very old, very old.
What the Neuralink technology?
Yeah.
Really? How old is it?
I can track back at least synthetic telepathy or piping voices into people's head right around Kennedy's assassination, but about 1958 was the earliest target I could find.
And who was this? What was the situation? Can you explain this specific incident?
Exactly like Len Ber's. Same thing. He wrote about it in a book. I don't remember the title of it exactly. It really seemed to come online with a bunch of people in about 1976, the bicentennial of this nation. And there seems to be increases in the number of people that have these complaints given bigger military budgets. Now, why there's a correlation there, I don't know. You'll have to make your own speculation. But this isn't new. Havana Syndrome is not new by any means. It has a new name. It's getting recognition by the news. But honestly, it's been squelched. It's been covered up for many, many decades.
Do you know if Elon has any sort of government contracts with Neuralink?
No. As far as I know, he does not. Okay. He'll be approached, obviously. But what I think they're doing, like some of the projects I worked on, in my time at DARPA, became real big companies like Google and Facebook and et cetera. So I think it's a technology transfer. They can help civilian scientists, come up with the ideas to make it look like it's new, and not the other way around, that the universities came up with it and then it's then they bought it from them. So I think, I hope Elon actually succeeds, because then this isn't imaginary stuff anymore. People will then see, wow, we can really connect brains together and make hyper intelligence. I sent you that article from Duke University, a video of how they put brain chips, and you don't need brain chips, but that's one technology, into 3 monkeys, connected their cerebral cortex. And in this experiment, they could prove that 3 monkey brains together acted intuitively as one brain and was able to solve a problem that the individual monkeys were not able to solve. And that's a really important finding. Now, can we extend that to an entire population and help solve the world's problems? We can't even fathom what a larger mind would look like. It's certainly not human.
Wasn't there another experiment done where they connected like a human and a human brain and a monkey's brain?
There was. How do you know about that one?
I heard about it. I don't remember where I heard about it. I was a girl.
Yes, and an ape in the Army experiment. I think it was in the 60s.
I might have heard you talk about it.
Oh, maybe. And it didn't end well. What they were trying to do is cybernetically link, and that's the term when you connect.
Who was doing this study?
It was the Army and one other group, but I can't remember. And they were hoping, because they didn't break down it all comes together. So give me a chance here. They weren't able to break down the ego of the ape or the girl per se. So their brains,
the what?
The young girl that was used as experiment.
So we're able to break down what?
The ego.
Ego. Okay.
So sense of self. We all have a sense of self.
Right.
We believe we're separated from everybody else. And even though we have two hemispheres of the brain, we believe we're one brain.
Right.
You know, it's an illusion, optical illusion, delusion of consciousness, as Einstein says. So what happened is when they put the girl in the cage, the ape tore apart. It wasn't able to recognize her as an extension of itself. And I believe this is part of the reason of the breakdown, the torture that TIs are experiencing, is they have to break down the ego in order to be part of a greater mind or mind controlled.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it is. A worldwide global brain.
Now, Len, how many people have you spoken with or met that are experiencing the same symptoms that you're experiencing?
Hundreds.
And when you went down to, was it Miami when you met with the doctor? How many people has he seen that he's diagnosed, and how specifically did he diagnose you? And were there any other neurological diseases that were similar or in the same realm as Havana Syndrome? Or did he actually diagnose you with quote unquote Havana Syndrome?
He diagnosed me with acquired neurosensory dysfunction. And that's the name of the paper that he published about Havana Syndrome. So if you read it, he talks about 25 symptomatic.
Maybe you can pull this up, Austin. What's his name?
Hoffer. Acquired.
Dr. Hoffer of University of Miami.
Yeah. So he examined 25 symptomatic patients, medevac from Cuba, and 10 of their roommates, because these attacks never happened at the embassy. It always happened at the hotel or living quarters, and they were in the same room.
They never happened at the embassy. That's interesting.
Never happened at the embassy. So people who experience symptoms, and there could be other people, their roommates, that never experienced it. And so all the people who experienced the symptoms were examined for signs of concussion, and they all had symptoms of concussion, even though they never had any physical trauma to their head. And they all had severe vestibular abnormalities. And the abnormalities were at the level of brain injury, not just variation within the population. Because the criticism was, well, vestibular tests are not really that precise, and some people with anxiety could have vestibular abnormalities, but not to this extent. And Dr. Hoffer really explains it in his lecture, in his paper. Dr. Giordano, who was part of the team, confirms it. Dr. Belband, who did a test of eye movement by applying this computerized method. And this is how they can tell the Havana Syndrome type of damage to the brain from a mechanical concussion. So they're both damage to the brain, but they're different because the mechanism is different.
So there's an eye test where they can tell.
Yeah, correct. The eye movement test.
But the effect of the damage is the same, but there's no physical, like, abrupt, like There's no trauma.
There's no
physical trauma.
There's no mechanical trauma.
Did you mention the quantitative EEG?
Yeah. So the same patients were sent to the University of Pennsylvania and to the trauma center, and they were all done. They performed various tests on them, including fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. There's specific type of MRI that shows connectivity in the brain called DTI, diffusion tensor imaging, and they found abnormalities that, once again, these specialists see in traumatic brain injury. So the doctors who examined these patients, they all in one voice tell us something happened to these patients, and these are the findings. And the findings are they constitute brain injury. The critics of that say this is psychogenic illness, and it's spread like mass hysteria. People under stress develop these sensations, and they all kind of repeat after each other, and their brain kind of develops these patterns. But none of these specialists, and I spoke to Dr. Bartholomew, who co-wrote a book about Havana Syndrome being mass hysteria, and he admitted himself in my conversation. He said, if there were findings of brain injury, that would invalidate my hypothesis.
Right.
And so the doctor, but he has never seen a patient with Havana Syndrome. But all the doctors that saw the patients say these patients have brain injury findings.
How many civilians are there dealing with the same thing?
I would give, from my estimate, low end around the world, and this is in every country, that can use the internet, that can contact me, minimum 10,000.
Minimum 10,000.
So that means a lot more.
Wow. And how many government workers, or how many FBI, whatever, politicians, diplomats?
Right. The very first CIA agent that came forward and said, I heard these crickets and this sound, and my brain hasn't been the same since. He's gone through the same process as Len Ber. Just block after block of government bureaucracy saying, you're delusional, this technology doesn't exist. And, you don't have to go to the Directed Energy Directorate of the Air Force to know that we've been working on this for a long time with our NATO allies. And so a lot of the work on these concussion weapons, non-lethal weapons, are done under that directorate.
Is anybody transparent about being who in government is being transparent about working on this kind of technology?
Len has stories, but he can't mention names.
Yes,
that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that there was an investigative reporting in Zeit magazine, which is a German publication. They investigated Havana Syndrome, and they talked to a prominent expert in the field of directed energy, and who published a short article following the events. And then he was contacted by the DoD and by the Air Forces that that he is not to speak publicly about it. Otherwise, they will pull his funding. And
yeah, that's part of the way that you prevent leaks. Is it's a form of financial blackmail that will pull your funding if you talk about any of this openly. And
Is there any correlation between you and some of the other people that have been experiencing the same thing? Is with timing of the attacks? Like, are the timing of the attacks similar between different people? Are people experiencing them at the same times? How are they being triggered? Specifically, how are they being triggered?
Yeah, it seems the ones that are severe, I call them, targets. It's some of it's stress related. You can tell. There was a paper in the late 1970s by the DIA, the Department Intelligence Agency, that said the Russians were trying to create a panic weapon that could kill a person, literally spook them to death by creating a runaway process with the adrenal gland and increasing it till blood pressure, any sort of weakness in their circulatory system, their heart would give out. And anytime we blame the Russians for something like that, we're working on it too. So it seems like oftentimes stress brings it on. And I've read that in some other papers, but otherwise it's constant for these people. 24 hours, constant. And they can't sleep. Which even makes it worse. It weakens the brain. Sleep deprivation is a common torture tactic, interrogation tactic, and it breaks down the will. You're more easily suggestible. He said he has major delta brain waves, which that's a hypnotic state, which makes you more susceptible. And one of the CIA's old weapons was called REHIC, remote hypnotic intracerebral control. A lot of people don't believe they can be hypnotized through, when people think of hypnotism, they think of a watch going back and forth. And no, that's not the actual definition of hypnotism. It's in training the brain. So binaural beats, for example, on headphones, if you're off by 8 hertz, you're in the alpha delta brainwave length, and you'll actually see the brain under an EEG start to mimic that binaural beating. That's hypnotism. Now you can do it on a much grander scale of the macro circuits, the main brain frequencies, or the microcircuits. So synthetic telepathy actually can induce different emotional states. Each part of the brain has different circuitry, different frequencies, different patterns. You can induce, you can mimic almost every illness and induce it. So when someone's classified, let's say, as manic depressive, we can do that. We can make them happy for a day and then make them depressed for a day. And then the doctor will prescribe certain drugs for them, which will then do more damage to their body. But you can see why the population can't know about this. Let's just say everything I said is true. It would be the breakdown of religion. It would be anarchy. There would be no democracy. Everything.
Well, there are programs like this that have been declassified and been acknowledged by the government, like MK Ultra. They acknowledged that was real. Operation Northwoods.
Yeah,
they recognized that was a real thing. That was declassified. There's things that are sinister that the government has done that they admit to, but nothing happens. A lot of people don't even pay attention to it.
Right, until it happens to them, and then it's too late. No one will help them.
It seems like with MK Ultra, though, they were targeting more so prisoners, people that were in prison, big shot. And obviously, when you think of MK Ultra, there's people like Ted Kaczynski, Charles Manson, who was the big mob guy, famous mob guy who killed a lot of people. I'm blanking on his name right now. But a lot of those people talked about how some of their contacts in the government, probation officers, were giving them LSD. That's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a real thing. It was on the masses. introduced to the United States and promoted. But you're talking about specific events, such as in San Francisco, where they put a one-way mirror up and had prostitutes.
That's that's Midnight Climax.
Yeah,
yeah,
Climax.
That's another one.
Yeah, and then Ted Kaczynski, he lived in my dorm at Harvard, not at the same time.
He was being experimented on in Harvard.
Yeah, and that was Project Moonstruck, I believe.
Project what?
Moonstruck.
Moonstruck. Okay.
A stress program.
That's a terrifying story.
Yeah, isn't it? And even the shooter in Vegas, he had FBI contacts, and that gets very murky. But the news never follows up on any of this. For example, I was in a suicide letter. The guy, Myron May, who shot up Florida State or University of Florida's library, like 10 years ago. Anyway, he didn't kill anybody, but he shot people, and then it was death by cop. He was a lawyer, trained there, a successful black man, and same symptoms of Len Ber. And his reasoning of why he shot up the school was he needed news publicity to make sure people understood this was real and was happening. And so he mentioned my name in it, but he never tried to contact me. But he gave out 7 packages in the mail, and the FBI intercepted them all to make sure none of the information was...
What were in these packages?
Just information. So they held on to it. The news stories sort of went away. People just were left, wonder why he did that. And then
what was this guy's name again?
Myron May.
Myron May.
Yeah.
And he clearly talked about having the same exact symptoms as Len.
Yeah.
Publicly.
Yeah. And he left a video testimony. And then people, the FBI eventually led it through to the senders, the packages, and they posted it on the internet. So you can find his testimony unless Google's taken it down, or YouTube or whatever. It's they don't want copycats, basically. So oh yeah, there it is.
Oh, this is what is this, like a CNBC News? Scroll down, Austin.
Gunman's motives remain unclear. See, and that's a lie by the media.
Hours before he opened fire in Florida State University Library, lawyer Myron May left a desperate voicemail for an acquaintance with his plea: "I do not want to die in vain." The message was part of a flurry of emails, texts, and phone calls in which the former prosecutor laid bare his torment. He believed government stalkers were harassing him and using a direct energy weapon to hurt him. He said that he had sent packages to 10 people that would expose what he thought was happening to him. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, and maybe you remember the Navy Yards shooter. He used a sawed-off shotgun, actually killed, I think, 13 people. He had a clearance to get on a Navy base, and he wrote on his weapon, and the news pretends like they have no idea what's going on. My ELF weapon, that stands for extremely low frequency, which the brain operates on, which we also communicate with submarines with because it penetrates everything. So he was convinced the Navy was behind it, and he just wanted revenge. He couldn't point the finger to stop it, so he just took it out on everyone on the base. But it creates such frustration. A lot of these shooters are trying to get this media attention.
What is this, Austin? Oh, okay. What do you think it would take for the government to, or for anyone responsible to be transparent and open about this?
I don't think they can be, because think of the atrocities and the lack of trust. I mean, that would happen.
Lack of trust of the government.
Yeah, well, I mean, even more so that they're socially engineering, let's say, gun rights. Well, let's have all these spree killers go on shooting sprees, and then the response of that stimulus would be take away guns. It's a way to socially engineer. And so you say your government wouldn't do that. Well, they very much in long-term perspectives of how they want to shape the New World Order or shape a UN, a single government controlled.
A vast majority of, I mean, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but I know that a vast majority of these public shooters, these school shooters, they were on antidepressants and a slew of different pharmacology and pharmaceutical drugs to help them deal with depression, social anxiety, different things like that. Couldn't that be part of what is going on? I mean,
it could. I would have to see their private psychological profile. And I told you, just because they're on drugs doesn't mean anything to me. I have to interview them and see if they're being driven. It's called psychic driving. The Scottish world psychiatrist who did brainwashing, Montreal University. I'm trying to pull up his name in my files now. Anyway, he called it psychic driving. And these women would go into the hospital for mild depression. He would play a 2-tape loop, just like these other breakdown processes. Your mother hates you, blah, blah, blah. I can't actually repeat how awful the scripts are they use. I compiled a list of 1,000 negative things they say, and I posted on Facebook and got away with it just because I put quotes around it.
And they use this to break down the ego?
Correct. And so they did that while they were in induced comas. I'm still talking about the brainwashing.
So they're unconscious.
Pseudo-unconscious.
Okay.
And they would keep them in a vegetative sort of sleep state.
Okay.
And I think it was probably in a delta or theta brainwave dominant state. So they could hear all this negativity. And I think they gave them LSD too. And they were just trying to and electroshock. So they were trying to wipe the brain clean so they could rebuild new memories. One woman, it was funded by the CIA. The psychiatrist got his funding from that. And the woman sued. She won. But she lost half her life. Can't remember it. Had to learn how to pee again, speak again, everything. So brainwashing works. The reprogramming part's what's interesting.
And just to make it absolutely clear, I do not have a diagnosis of paranoid or delusional disorder. I have a clean bill from my psychiatrist. The only thing that he suggested as a diagnosis is adjustment disorder, which means that I'm adjusting to this torture.
Well, at what point did you decide to see a psychiatrist?
Oh, at the very beginning, because I was actually hoping that it was a psychiatric disorder, because that way it can be treated, but it's not. This is, I had to educate my psychiatrist, but he's a very smart. Actually, every single one of my physicians that take care of me, neurologist, psychiatrist, primary care physician, and now Dr. Giordano in DC, who also confirmed, they're all on the same page. This is my diagnosis.
I just remembered the brainwashing doctor's name is Dr. Ewan Cameron.
Dr. Ewan Cameron,
yeah.
And he's Russian?
No, he was American Scottish.
American.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
This kind of funding goes on all the time, and we often do it in other countries. Long list of human experimentation by the National Institute of Health. And
I saw my neighbor this morning. My neighbor worked for Honeywell for over 35 years. He worked for Honeywell. Mm-hmm. And I sort of briefly ran told him who I was talking to today on the podcast, and I talked about Havana Syndrome, and he said, "Oh yeah," he goes, "That's 100% real." He's like, "I know we've worked on weapons like that, and so I know they work on those weapons at Raytheon." He said,
"Yeah, I can't talk about that, but yeah, he's right."
You can't talk about it.
Yeah.
But you can confirm that
I can confirm. I can confirm. That's all.
How for people like you and your colleagues going to school studying artificial intelligence, what percentage of you guys are you guys, when you guys are doing that, or do you guys have aspirations to work for the military, work for the CIA, to be spies? Like what?
No, I was a scientist. And worked on advanced surveillance equipment and other things. As a scientist, you just want to be working on cutting edge science. You don't, and you believe you're doing your country a favor and eventually be used for good. And that's part of how you get funding from the Senate for billion-dollar projects, is you have to have dual purpose, one for civilian uses and one for military. And we don't really think of the implications for the negative part. We just want to work on new cutting edge stuff. And it's also compartmentalized on the most part. So a lot of people don't know how they're putting together a bigger weapon system if they just work on a piece of it.
Isn't Facebook working on weren't they working on something called the empathy machine or something like that? I think I talked about. Yeah.
But yeah.
What is that?
That is, if you can induce these emotions, touch, torture, whatever, in a way, it's kind of a beautiful thing. If you have a partner and they say something that hurts their feelings, you say something that hurts their feelings, you get to feel how they're feeling, and vice versa. So if you punch someone, you're going to feel the same pain that they do. That's called the empathy machine. But now imagine if you go beyond 2 people. Let's go to 100 people. Every time someone stubs their toe, they all feel the same pain. It would feel like random torture to everybody. Well, who stubbed their toe?
I can see the first application, the most obvious thing I could see this thing going to is pornography.
Yes. They already have, sort of virtual machines for.
Right. If they could somehow if you could buy a subscription to some sort of pornography and make every single guy watching this thing happen,
Okay. Now I don't know what I'm allowed
this
to say.
This is already being used. If
you talk to the victims, the TIs, one of the worst breakdowns, and it's pretty common. I think I can say the word simulated rape and forced orgasm.
You can say anything you want. This is the internet.
Okay. And so simulated orgasms and rape is extremely common, and especially violating for women. They complain about that torture breakdown the most. But you're right. What's the positive use?
Where is it the most lucrative? Where is it the most financially beneficial? Like, where can you make the most money in this thing? You think that would be the most obvious first?
That would be the first.
Yeah.
But think of the problem. It would have to be regulated, because we know the 7 pleasure centers of the brain. And let's just say we don't have to stick in electrodes. We use ultrasonic helmet like the University of Arizona is doing to target certain parts of the brain. You just sit there and press the button all day, over and over.
There's a story of a woman that what's the story? There was a story of a woman who was in the hospital. Something was wrong with her. You may know, but she had a button. And every time she pressed it, it made her orgasm. And she was just doing it and doing it and doing it until she was basically a vegetable.
Yeah. You eventually quit eating. You die. So the government would have to step in to regulate this somehow. I don't think a lot of my research just focuses on the negative, the tortured people, the targeted, the breakdown. They're the most vocal. They're the loudest. But there is a classification weapon system called the Voice of God, and I've met some of these people.
A classified weapon system?
It's just the categorization called Voice of God weapons. Anything you can make someone hear, believe it's God.
And these are real.
Yes.
These are publicly.
There's Newsweek wrote about them.
Okay.
So it's been out for a while.
Voice of God weapons.
Voice of God.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
And so I've run into people randomly who believe they're talking to God. God doesn't have a voice, I don't think. I don't know what he sounds like, but they're convinced, and they'll do whatever this voice tells them. And that's the dangerous part. That's another form of trickery. God wants you to go on a killing spree, let's say. Some people would do that. You're one of God's army. So you can see how this broad swath all over the world, not only is it experimental, it could be very much a secret army of assassins. And so I call them programmed assassins. But the positive part, the voice of God, it worked in the Gulf Wars, Gulf War, when we said, Allah, lay down your arms. That's a voice of God weapon.
Okay. Is this, and you can't talk about, or can you talk about, this is something that you were involved with?
A little bit.
A little bit. Who was Dr. Is this something that Dr. Jose Delgado talked about? Well, and who was he, and what specifically did he work on?
Dr.
Jose Delgado.
He was
Look him up, Austin.
He was known as the father of brain chips. And so he was from Yale University. And he did a lot of brain experimentation, stuff that is unethical and we wouldn't allow today per se. But we made progress of understanding the brain. He would actually wire up people. His most famous experiment was with a bull. He implanted a bull with a radio frequency chip, and he could make a bull stop from charging by pressing a button. And that impressed everybody quite a bit.
Wow.
But that's using brain chips. And
where was he? Was he in the United States?
Yeah.
But you don't need chips anymore.
Okay, this is him with the bull.
Yeah, there he is.
Dr. Jose Delgado steps into the Spanish bull ring as a bold demonstration of his research.
A risky behavioral control demonstration.
Wow. And he was working with the government? He had a famous quote, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Let's see if you can bring up the quote. Mankind does not have a right to develop his own mind.
Austin, pull up his quote. So what was Delgado working? What did he do? Where was he working from? What was he working in one of the universities here?
Yes, he was working at Yale Medical School, and he would insert wires into people's brains. And, there's always two sides to the story.
Okay, here it is. Man does not have the right to develop his own mind. This kind of liberal orientation has great appeal. We must electrically control the brain. Someday, armies and generals will be in control by electrical stimulation of the brain.
And that was in the 60s, I believe.
Whoa. So that's heavy.
We've come a long way since.
Yeah, I mean, if people were openly talking about that in the 60s, where are we now? And where are other nations like China and Russia and Iran?
We boycotted recently like over 100 countries from doing companies in China because they were working on mind control technologies. So, it's very much out in the open. But it's just people don't want to recognize their soul, so to speak, can be touched. Their very ego, their sense of self can be altered. They're not in control of their own emotions. That means if you don't have free will or autonomy or choice, democracies don't exist. That means religions don't exist. That means a whole bunch of things. Markets can be shaped, moved up or down at will based on people's preferences. It's total domination of the world. That's how important and why it's kept so secret. I think it's the ultimate weapon, because if you can control the people with their fingers on nuclear weapons, you're one step ahead. So this is kind of the end game, is full control of the human mind.
And at scale.
at scale, that's right, of the world.
It's kind of hard to even wrap my mind around.
It is. Something bigger than yourself is always hard to imagine. And so that's why the monkey brain experiments that they were doing at Duke, we can't fathom what us three, if our brains were connected at the speed of thought, could come up with or think about. We have to use vibrations from our throat, deciphered through our brains, through our ears, and then and talk. It's kind of an outdated form of communication amongst brains.
Well, I mean, think about it. If something like Neuralink actually came onto the market as a consumer product, that people could get this neural net inserted into their brain, and they could give them the ability to learn new skills instantaneously, or download books within seconds, or like the advantage economically would be astounding.
Yes.
And more people would adopt this
in order to compete.
In order to compete. But the scale, so what would be, so the downside of something like this is, once you have this, it would be no problem. You would almost assume that the government would be able to have some level of control over this.
It would have to, and that's why they're kind of experimenting. What are the potential downfalls? We have a term of mind viruses. How do memes pass?
Mind viruses.
Could you hack, if all the minds were connected, could you insert a virus that might shut down the human race?
That's fascinating. The term mind virus, I've used that, and I've heard it used a lot when it comes to things like QAnon. Are you familiar with QAnon?
I heard of them, yes.
So there's it's a group of people online who follow this anonymous poster on these threads, these forums, and this guy pretends to be he pretended to be one of Trump's right-hand guys, and he would make these anonymous posts talking to all these people, and all these people called him Q. And they thought that this guy was real. This guy was one of the people right next to him. And he'd make these cryptic anonymous quotes. And there was this super hyper, just hyper passionate political group of people who were Trump supporters. And they believed that this Q person was going to save them, and giving them these directives of what was going to happen next, and to be prepared for the storm that's coming. And that led to the Capitol being raided. And they find all these little things. They find something Trump said during one of his speeches, and okay, that sentence means this. That means we have to storm the Capitol. And they keep finding all these synchronicities online, and they think they mean something more.
Humans look for meaning and purpose, and we find it in the strangest places. It's like looking at clouds. We'll see shapes. Is it chaos or is it order?
It almost seems if anything seems like a mind virus, something like that seems like it's a mind virus. But it really affected, if you look at the people it affected a certain type of people. It affected certain people that were lonely, didn't have a lot going on, didn't have some sort of larger sense of a community. They didn't have big families. Sometimes it was like a woman living alone in an apartment, and her kids weren't even living with her anymore. People that just sort of like misfits. They all had a very similar social life and social intelligence.
So how would you build, if you look at us community, the whole human race, maybe the planet as a whole organism, how would you build an immune system to fight against something like that? Now, I do not believe in censorship myself, but how would you stop the flow of a mind virus? And so they're experimenting with things like
interaction with other human beings.
Yeah.
Not through screens, not through social media.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like the more people are just accustomed to, again, this is another one of the commonalities between these people, is all their communication with other humans was through a phone or through a computer. They didn't spend time like this having conversations with people.
And
what the fuck are you talking about? You're full of shit. Are you serious? But Like having somebody actually poke holes in what they're saying and question what they're talking about, instead of it's just this echo chamber of the same ideas bouncing back and forth.
Yeah. I fully agree. It's an echo chamber. There are other terms like memetic viruses, memes that turn into viruses. You're familiar with those that get posted around. But you know, the utopia, the kind of end goal that people, the visionaries, see with this technology, they know that transhumanism can't be stopped at this point, but they want to take the safest route. So a lot of these experiments are unfortunately sacrifices that will help the future generations. And that's kind of their internal marketing ploy of why they must do it. And there's a race between, you know, the three major countries, who's going to have the best AI, whose culture is going to survive, whose money is going to dominate, whose, you know, language is going to dominate. And so this is very competitive field in the military right now. Who can collect the most minds the fastest, build the the biggest hive mind network. And so my next book is called, it's not published yet, it's called Emergent Minds, The Birth of a New Species. And that's under the three books that I've written of cyber and cybernetic warfare revealed. And it's going to be about kind of these architectures, topologies of humans, nodes, computing units. Very cold, the way it's described. But I'm trying to bring out the ethics of all this. The human race has to have a discussion, and this has to be on the mainstream media. Havana Syndrome. Well, what is it? They don't seem to care. They're hushing it. They don't. We know what it is because it's been around so long. We know the type of weapons used.
Well, there's no financial incentive for them to talk about it either.
True, other than being good reporters.
Right. But that's not an incentive anymore.
No, it's not an incentive anymore.
So the big question is how this energy is delivered. So National Academy of Sciences in 2020 issued a report about these Havana Syndrome incidents, or anomalous health incidents, as the government wants us to call it. And the most plausible hypothesis is directed pulse microwave energy. So that's the causative agent. That's what causes the brain damage.
Directed pulse microwave energy.
Yeah. Pulse is very, very important, because if you just microwave, it just heats up. But short pulses produce that thermoelastic effect. So the tissue is just expanding and collapsing in that way. It heats up just enough to induce damage or produce that audio, that fray effect, to hear sound or modulated voices, things like that. So pulse is very important in this scenario. But that report did not say how it can be delivered. And when you look at the 60 Minutes report, they show these devices that can fit into a small car, or maybe backpack, or a truck, or a van, but that's an outdated technology. I question, and Robert made me question, whether it is a local source. You know, somebody sits in the van and shoots a microwave at you. So we took a trip to West Virginia, where there's a radio national quiet zone. So there are no cell towers. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no cell phone, only receive satellite signal. There's no
phone signal.
No phone signal, no Wi-Fi. And we got inside. The reason they created that zone is because there's a deep space telescope radar, basically, that receives signals from deep state. So they don't want any interference. The zone 1, the closest to these radars, is actually has a radio police that monitors the signals. They don't allow cars with ignition because it produces electromagnetic signal. So I got next to the biggest radar and got attacked. So people that, there's no van outside.
So when you got to this place, you experienced one of these?
Yeah, I experienced one of the attacks. Just when you have to walk there, there's no, because, can't take a car. So went several miles, got there, was attacked. So definitely not a local effect. It's coming from somewhere, and you have a satellite signal. But you also have things like HARP that can, HARP stands for
High Altitude
Auroral
Research Project. And it's one of the world's largest phased arrays. It's used for weather modification, steering.
Weather modification?
Well, that's one of the things it can do.
What is weather modification?
Oh, steering hurricanes, for warfare. Yeah. You heat the ionosphere and you can guide the weather. That's just one of the things.
This is a thing?
Oh, yeah. Pull it up.
And what's it called?
HARP. H-A-R-P.
And you can steer hurricanes.
Well, they don't actually, they just say weather modification. What does that mean?
Yeah,
I
guess the mind can get creative.
But it operates also as an over-horizon radar system to detect missile launches in Russia, for example. And
because I've been hit by about a dozen hurricanes since I've lived here.
Oh yeah,
I wish they would control them a little better.
Exactly. And so, you were asking what is some of the good tech that could come out of this? Why aren't they steering the hurricanes away from the coast? Maybe the Russians are doing it. We always blame everything on the Russians. But it has a lot. It's also often by Dr. Nick Baggage, focused on mind control over populations. What it really does, a lot of, at least the air, and it's run by the Air Force, Army, and Navy. It heats the ionosphere, which causes the current radar signals, ultra high frequency waves, to be able to cover the Earth. Now there's a electric gradient between ground, the Earth, and the ionosphere, ions. And then we are bathed in a magnetic field. Those two perpendicular fields, a lot of high energy physics, such as nuclear magnetic resonance imaging, occurs. We have turned the Earth into one giant MRI machine. So we can image underground bases. We can do a lot of things that people don't believe. They'll say the Boltzmann, I won't use scientific words, they'll just say the thermal effect. You can't do MRIs under Earth's natural magnetic field. We've been doing it easily since the 60s in universities. So a recent article came out, wow, we can recover dreams and play them back, and we can read the inner vocabulary of somebody, what they're thinking, talking to themselves with their inner voice, using a functional nuclear magnetic resonance imaging machine, like in a hospital. But that's a higher resolution, but they just use new algorithms to do it. And it was very accurate for a bunch of people, which is interesting. They say it's new. Well, I mean, it's obviously not new, but...
Or they can read people's inner thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have you think I don't know how you read. Some people read or think in images. We can read the images. Some people think in words. And it's about 60% to 40% of the population does one or the other.
And it's able to decipher each one.
Yeah. Yeah. So some people will go through a grocery shopping list. Apple. I need, toilet paper. I need this or that. And they think in the words. Those can be deciphered. Other people think the image when they create those lists. And so each one is a brain signature. And when you have a sample over a large enough population, you get just like Amazon's Echo. You can more voice samples they have.
Yeah.
And I worked on voice sampling technology way back when. Now it's so good. I mean, Alexa, it just amazes me that it can understand human language without any practice.
Right.
Because they've had so many samples. Well, similarly, we need more brain samples. And that's part of the reason, I think, for a lot of this experimentation on the public, random people. I'm trying to link it all back together.
So, Len, when you went to West Virginia and you went to this place that had no connection to any cell towers, there was no phone signal anywhere, and you had this attack, what specifically happened to you? Like, what can you walk me through how these attacks, like how they affect you, what happens, how long they last, etc.?
Just like I said before, it starts very suddenly. It's vibration. It's high pressure in the head, and your whole body vibrates. Deafening sound. You get disoriented.
Your whole body
vibrates.
Can
Exactly.
you describe the sound that you hear? Is it like someone in the cartoons hitting a pot around your head?
It's like high pitch electronic tinnitus.
Okay. Yeah.
Like tinnitus.
Yeah, tinnitus.
But suddenly on, suddenly off.
Suddenly on, suddenly off.
Yeah.
And it just grabs you, and you also hear voices.
Yeah.
Voices, V2K is a part of it. In Havana Syndrome, I sent you that clip. The very first reporting by CNN, they said that people hear noises and voices. And after that, there was it was not part of any reporting. But the very first report on CNN contained that information. So, people think that hearing voices is a sign of psychiatric disorder,
Right.
but it just takes a little bit of education to understand this Frey effect, this microwave hearing has been around for a long time, has been known, and voice modulation has been demonstrated in the 70s. There's published literature about it, that you can modulate the signal and it produces
Dr. Len from the University of Chicago.
Yeah,
Dr. Len
Yeah.
from the University of Chicago.
He has a setup where he demonstrates the microwave hearing effect, that he pulses it. The person who's standing in the middle of the signal where it's focused can hear it. And he does it on himself, and that scares me. I mean, he's heating up his brain, he's listening to these clicks, these chirps, as you know, they're called by the CIA or the diplomats, that get hit. And that's a sign of the microwave hearing effect. And it creates small little micro concussions over time.
And what specific voices? Like what do the voices say?
All the derogatory stuff that I don't want to acknowledge it, don't want to give it credence, but it's one of those kind of shaming, derogatory, very negative, just.
Yeah, if you have, everyone has an ego. They will go through the most common ones first. You know, let's say you're a woman and you're concerned about your your breast size. Well, they'll go after that. Or
so they're going at individuals specifically,
yeah,
like
and so
your specific insecurities.
Yes. No, but first they have to do a broad approach to find out what your insecurities
It doesn't seem like time or cost effective.
How
would you go about, if you were doing this to millions of people, how would
you
scale it? How would you have the time to go through each person, find out this person's overweight, this person is short, and be able to specifically tailor a voice to them?
I'll explain that. Think of it as a lie detector machine. It knows your stress levels. It can read them. You can do that from many different brain signals, but the P300 is a recognition signal, for example. It's just a term that's used for a specific strong effect after a stimulus. If there's recognition. But if it's a lie detector test, whatever polygraph, we'll say those. You can defeat those with a little practice.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, polygraphs are bullshit.
Yeah, they're total bullshit. But you can imagine, okay, so this is some form of a lie detector test, but maybe it uses heart rate and, can measure, some other factors other than necessarily neuronal ones. But whatever bothers you, it will continue doing. So let's say this is a robot. Chat bot that's very convincing, voice morphing, and we're the NSA, we sampled your I don't know anything about your family, so hopefully your great grandfather, he's dead, right? So we can bring him back to life. We can use his voice, we can voice morph him, and we can project it, and we'll say using the microwave hearing effect with a robot. We will go through, it doesn't matter if you had a good relationship with him or bad, we're going to turn him into a bad guy. Let's say you're going to respect him or something. I know this is a very off the wall kind of scenario, but they make it much more personal than that.
So whose voice do you hear?
Tell them.
My family.
Your family's voice.
My family. They live in Germany. They speak Russian and German. I speak Russian, bad Russian now, and English. So all my V2K is in Russian.
What?
It is, yes.
It's multilingual.
It's my mother, my father, my brother, and his wife. And they all talk about my lifestyle choices, everything derogatory. And I know it's not them. It's artificial intelligence, because nobody talks 24/7, because my V2K is 24/7. I sleep in noise canceling headphones, and I play voice audiobooks nonstop. So my brain would concentrate on that rather than on what's being projected into my brain.
Does it help at all? What helps? What helps you cope with this the most? What have you done? What have you tried?
Distracting. Sometimes I have to use my own voice. I have to talk to somebody. The second it stops, the second the silence begins, the voices come back, and they also use something like. If you have some kind of white noise, like a fan or a AC,
yeah,
it rides on it. It piggybacks on those frequencies.
That's called EEG heterodyning. So the nerve cells from your ears to your brain can also be stimulated. So if there's a nice background noise, broad spectrum, it can even be pink noise, which means lower noise spectrum. It can amplify a recognition signal, like a voice. I was like using the talking guitar. Remember that song? Who does that? And it's a guitar that sounds like it talks to the audience. Mm-hmm. I'm spacing who does that, but it was very unique at the time. What it's doing is it's heterodyning a voice signal onto the guitar. Well, now imagine heterodyning someone's voice onto nerve signals of a background noise. And that's what's going on with projecting voices into, let's say, fans, refrigerator noises, street noises. But my favorite one was that I heard about was a woman who could hear voices, and this was on television, and she ended up doing some bad things, but she could hear Rice Krispies talk to her. I was like, oh yeah, that's background noise. Yeah. So that would make sense. So it's eerie. It's something you have to experience. And I was going to make a machine to do that, to try to demonstrate it to the common man. And I just, I have so many projects I'm working on, never got around to it, but
it's hard to imagine that somebody would do something like that to you, but it is, and the first thought that probably comes to your mind is that there's something wrong with me psychiatrically. Yeah, I mean, this is, if I didn't know about the existence of this technology, this would be my guess, that this person developed delusional disorder. This is a paranoid schizophrenia. But first of all, nobody develops paranoid schizophrenia in their 50s. This is, if you haven't developed it by 30, it's not. Then this technology exists. These nefarious programs exist. And it's hard to imagine for a person that, why would you do something like this? But if you think about the new type of warfare,
cognitive warfare.
Exactly. It's a cognitive warfare. You don't have to kill people that you are fighting against. You can just degrade their brain. You can,
you alter their minds.
Yeah, alter their minds.
Personalities.
And it's like Chinese torture. I mean, okay, so whatever, they're talking to your head, into your head, just ignore it. You can't. It's 24/7. It's nonstop. And it's accompanied by these attacks that make you so vulnerable.
Read them the definition of directed energy weapons. Oh, you may not have it in front of it, but it's kind of interesting.
You can pull it up.
I send it to you to and drop it.
The definition of directed energy weapons.
What
systems.
they use, systems. And
directed energy weapon systems.
And what they say in this particular definition was interesting, that it's disablement of personnel. Now, how could you disable a person? Okay, most people think directed energy, a laser beam. Okay, you burn them a few times. That's not really disabling them. Making them dysfunctional, that would be scrambling their brains. That would be dopamine dumps. That would be making, concussion weapons. That would be somehow affecting their nervous system so they drop on the ground. So it's a combination of psychological warfare as well as directed energy weapons, along with the voice of God weapons, with voice morphing, with artificial intelligence chatterbots. It's the most complex weapon system we have put together ever as a species.
Wow. And do you think this is something that the United States is working on because other nations are working on it as well? Is it a competitive thing?
Yeah, it's very.
Is it like just an internal governmental control thing?
There was something called Project Paperclip, where we split up German scientists. Operation Paperclip.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
We talk about all the rocket scientists we got, put them into NASA and other programs. We don't talk about
the Nazi scientists.
Yeah, we don't talk about the mind scientists we got. Those were kind of classified. That's where a lot of this research started. Now, if we got half of them, so did the Russians. So it's been we compete with, our intercontinental ballistic missiles. Of course, we're going to compete with cognitive warfare, total control of the mind. CIA agent called Mark Phillips, he's unfortunately passed away. he did a lot of work on exposing this type of world domination through psychological warfare. And he also helped a woman whose name is, Kathy. Well, I can remember it's Kathy. And she, and he helped her out of the program, deprogrammed her and some other things. And they wrote a book together. It's very popular. Yeah, that's about all I can say for now.
Len, what when you talk to other people who have experienced the same thing you have and that are going through the same thing, do you guys do anything to or do you guys talk about things to do to be proactive in sort of mitigating the effects of this happening to you guys and to people in the future, to multiple people? Is there a way to deter this, or is there a way to avoid this from happening?
This has to become a political issue. The politicians have to, the government first of all, the government has to acknowledge that this is happening to civilians, not just to the diplomats and spies overseas. It is happening domestically. My case can be swept under the rug. I have every expert that I've seen. I have a validated case, as validated as those diplomats that listed in the intelligence report. The latest intelligence report on the subject was issued on February 1st of this year. It's a joint report of the Office of DNI, Director of National Intelligence, and CIA, and they said 24 cases we can't explain, and the most plausible explanation is directed pulse microwave energy. I am exactly in that category. My case is validated. I have brain damage. I have vestibular damage, and the agency that's supposed to investigate it is the FBI, because I'm a civilian. It's happening domestically. They ignore it. I went to my congresswoman. She wrote an inquiry to the FBI, and they basically responded with a nonsensical letter that something that there are no facts that any law is broken or something, or it's under our jurisdiction. I am a civilian. My brain is accessed remotely and damaged on the regular basis. In 3.5 years, you look at my brain scan and it looks like a battlefield. All those delta connection, all this broken connection, the connectivity, my vestibular organs are shut. If I close my eyes, I stand up, close my eyes, I will fall.
So he asked what else we're doing and in order to stop this. And a lot of us do research, jammers on certain frequencies, on certain patterns, seems to help some.
Jammers.
That means with the electromagnetic signal, electro and magnetic in the ELF wave range or other ranges people have found, it gives them some relief. It blocks the tinnitus. Even if they're not a targeted individual, what could explain a frequency or set of a pattern, an algorithm that would turn off tinnitus for people? I mean, great. You were talking about economic advantage. I mean, even if it has nothing to do with this, half the public suffers from tinnitus,
right,
or tinnitus, as you like to call it. And we protested. When I say we, I mean the people that I represent, in front of the White House, and writing all the congressmen, every imaginable thing you can imagine, getting hold of newspapers and writing the FBI, which is funny. Yesterday, There was an article or a piece that came out. It said the FBI is now being attacked by the
Right. I saw that. Yeah, in Miami, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
You sent me that.
Right. And the attorney who represents victims.
I sent you that article, by the way.
Mark Zaid. He repeatedly he had several statements and about this being a government cover-up. And what he means by it is that the government knows what's going on, and the government would not acknowledge any domestic cases, neither with federal happening to federal employees or civilians. And the government needs to acknowledge it. Then it needs to investigate it, and it needs to stop it, because I am a part of general public. And my message is, if it can happen to me, my brain can be remotely accessed and damaged. It can happen to anyone, because I'm literally nobody. I'm just happen to be on the radar. They probably got a sample of my DNA, and DNA has resonant frequency. This is just like a tuning fork. It will vibrate if the frequency is correct. Well, every molecule has a resonant frequency, and DNA is just another molecule that unique to you. Therefore, the resonant frequency is also unique to you. So just like we can find from a satellite, scanning and, visually we can, I think in the 70s they were bragging, we can see a license plate from a satellite, but it doesn't have to be a visual. You can just scan for frequency. You can find that frequency just like you can find your cell phone anywhere on the planet, because we have full satellite coverage. We have access through this.
That's the best analogy I've heard, is put all your cell phones in a big bag. Why does only one ring? Because of resonance frequencies. Everything is resonance. And that's what Tesla...
What do you mean, why does only one? If you put all your cell phones in a bag...
And someone dials a phone number, only that phone number will ring.
Right, okay.
Why is that? And so people kind of wonder, how can you target a single human or a single brain amongst the whole room of people?
Right.
And that's just a good analogy.
You guys were talking about something about twins, about maternal or paternal twin children.
Oh, yeah. I was just saying,
the same DNA.
If that theory is correct, and it's a theory because I haven't studied it, that you can tune in altered DNA patterns, and I don't see why not. You couldn't do that. But the first thing I would do is go find, identical twins,
right? Find
out if they are being targeted when they're in the same room, or if you can find a pair that one is targeted and one is not. And why would that be? They have identical DNA. So it's still a theory at this point that he's projecting.
It's a speculation. And the other way to find somebody by their brain signature also, just you scan the area, and whatever resonates, you get the signal back. That's your target, and you apply that energy to that target, which is a human brain.
Yeah, there are actually several modalities and methods and techniques that we can use to alter brain patterns and stimulate the nervous system. It's usually done on monkeys. You can find the research from the Navy and other organizations that sponsored some of these horrific things on life that feels pain. And, our history isn't that great, isn't pleasant when things are exposed. There are 100 other things going on that haven't been.
So the idea with individuals, in specific, people like Len, people like the lawyer in I think it was Tallahassee, is that you can use this sort of artificial intelligence voice in the head to break down the ego and control an individual to perform certain acts.
Ultimately, yes. And in Project Soul Catch, I referred to a Myron May, right, as a psychobomb. They didn't care who the target was. They were just trying to make him explode and do something bad.
And if the problem is, if these people do explode and do something bad like this, there's absolutely no way to prove that there's been any sort of manipulation to the brain. In this guy's case, he talked about it. I mean, obviously he talked,
but it was covered up.
He's
by
the way they write the article. He sounds like a crazy person.
Yeah. That's part of plausible deniabilities and direction.
That's another fascinating thing with the CIA is the use of conspiracies to sort of create stigma around certain things, certain technologies or certain topics, whether, for example, if they are working on something, they want to create stigma and create conspiracy theories around certain things to sort of use that as a weapon against that idea.
Yeah. And in fact, the Homeland Security now, Biden has weaponized them, that there are dangerous conspiracies and we got to stop these. And
right. That's another, yes.
So your broadcasts, we may all be arrested. I don't know. This might be a dangerous conspiracy. Or we're telling the truth and we're saving lives because knowledge. If you have knowledge ahead of time, Len, would you have gone through as much pain? I mean, you would have been able better to cope early on. Right. So we're trying to spread awareness and knowledge of, that it's a machine and not your actual family, let's say, berating you. And mind control is so powerful in these weapons and voice to God. I mean, you have no ability to discern, like looking at a computer screen, a television, what goes into your mind. It is directly stimulating those neurons to think that. So, I mean, is bypassing your peripheral vision. Some people can see through their third eye, and that's called in psychology the visual workspace. Some people can smell artificial things, taste artificial things. All the senses have been bypassed, like in the movie The Matrix. They're literally plugged in to a synthetic controlled reality that they cannot differentiate from their external bodily senses.
Do you have any reason to believe that organizations like the CIA have used stigma as a tool to discredit these kind of conversations?
It's unfortunate. We had laws, I think, passed in the 70s that psyops by our military, Pentagon, CIA, etc., could not be done to the American public because that's kind of ruining the whole idea of democracy. But that was reversed after 9/11 and some other events since. So I mean, it's just the game of war games that all countries play with each other, and of course they're going to do it. I just don't like that they're doing it to my population. And is there evidence that they've been doing it? Yes, it's everywhere. And what I do a lot
it's
of
everywhere.
Yeah, and a lot of times what I do in my research, because I'm a scientist, is I'll go through the patent office, let's say, and there's obvious economic good science that's going to lead somewhere, and then a big black space. I look in those black spaces. Why isn't there more research there? It went dark. The patents were pulled. The research went dark. There are a lot of examples that, and this is the biggest one for me that woke me up from the Matrix, is this technology is world changing. And people are complaining about it everywhere. And, the news won't cover it. I mean, that is a huge cover-up, and all they have to say is, "You're crazy," and then the response is, "Well, maybe you're just dumb." There are two forms of. You can be an ultimate skeptic, which will get you nowhere. Or you can be totally, gullible, and those are two extremes. And just do, your research, and you'll see all this. What do you think, Len?
I think the biggest problem is people can't imagine how much this neuroscience advanced, how much it matured, what the possibilities are. It is often described as science fiction, but it is totally real. It's real, and every neuroweapon expert, from Giordano to McRae to Krishnan and their colleagues, are saying this is no longer science fiction. This is reality. You have to accept, and we have to deal with it. That the civilian population is attacked. The technology exists. Your brain can be accessed remotely, damaged remotely, and we need to have a public conversation about it.
Let me ask you, Danny, don't you think Hollywood and a lot of movies and etc. are slowly getting the next generation ready to accept this kind of technology? There are so many movies made about it, and but they're in the realm of science fiction. It would be a good way to make someone like Elon Musk the scapegoat, for example. We just developed this technology, and so and maybe it can cure mental illness. This is my hypothesis. They're going to stop it one day. They're going to say, we have neurotechnology that can retrain the brain out of its dysfunctional patterns. Suddenly they just, they quit torturing the people, the TIs, and they don't do any more. And they just say, well, it's because we found a cure. And that's how they're going to excuse all the past atrocities. This is called a Mentacost, which is menticide, the killing of the mind, and it's done on a mass scale, a Mentacost. And I think they're going to get away with it. I really do. I know that's depressing, but I don't think we're going to be able to expose this, because it will create anarchy if people believe it.
How many weapons, how many different projects like this are going on right now that are completely hidden from the public, that the public has no idea about? So things like what we're talking about right now, people are aware of it. People have been aware of it for a while. People have been talking about Havana Syndrome for a while. Nothing has been done really, but I mean, things like this, people are at least aware of. How many more things are there beneath the surface that people don't have any idea about?
They're all interconnected. I mean, wars about ultimately controlling the enemy. The book, The Art of War, is an excellent short read. And it's to make your enemy believe you're near when you are far. It's to believe you are weak when you are strong. It's to believe you are unorganized when you're very smart and strategic. And so they play all these games along with the torture scripts right out of the books on the target. And they make them believe that their neighbor with a ray gun is doing it to them, or a van. You are near when you're actually far. And all they have to do is jump on an airplane, find out, and we'll follow them anywhere. How many projects? They're so integrated. They're numerous. But you see the beginnings of them. Like I remember as a child, I made a maser. Maser is like a laser. The M just stands for microwave amplification of stimulated emission radiation. But now we really have guns like that, and the Navy just had hooked up a big argon laser that shoots down missiles on their ships. So you can see the beginnings oftentimes.
What is there's something called like Project Bluebeam?
Yeah, good one.
What is that?
That's
lasers, right?
Yeah, I can actually talk about that one, but that is it's really bad. But you know the people that see orbs in the sky.
Yeah,
go around that fly faster.
UFOs.
UFOs.
Yeah, there's Navy pilots. There's multiple Navy pilots who talk about they got their so they were flying F-18s. These Navy pilots, and one of them's coming in here in 2 weeks. He's Ryan Graves.
Okay.
He's a Navy pilot flying off the coast of North Carolina, and they got their radar upgraded on their F-18s, and all of a sudden they were seeing these things darting around on their radar.
Okay. Don't tell him what I'm about to say and see if he knows about it.
Okay.
So what we do is we play with our own forces to make sure our trickery will work on the enemy. And those are directed energy weapons of where we do intersecting beams or focus beams into the atmosphere. And notice they're always in the atmosphere to excite the electron orbitals of the oxygen and nitrogen in our atmosphere, and it causes a glow and it causes ionization. That ionization shows up on radar, and it's like a cat laser pointer, and we're making planes chase them.
That's exactly how they describe these things moving, like laser pointers.
Yeah, and so we can do it in 3 space. We can make it look like
in 3-dimensional space.
Yeah, and we can make it look like an entire fleet is about to drop bombs on, let's say, Europe, and then just have them disappear. And they get all their planes up in the air, and we attack them from the other direction, assuming we're attacking Europe.
Who is doing this? The Navy, you said?
Somebody. Let's just say a group. You know.
And you know this for a fact.
I know for a fact, yeah. So anyway, don't tell your guests.
A group within the U.S. government.
Yeah, okay, we'll leave it at that. Yes.
And is this something that could be seen with the naked eye, or
yes,
was this something
because
that was only...
it glows? It glows, so it would be seeable. You can see it by the naked eye, and it would leave a radar trace. So it's perfect as a deception.
Now, have you heard of the accounts of these things going underwater? These things come out of the water, zip around, they fly. There's been accounts of these things going in between when there's 2 F-18s flying in formation. One of them, they're described as, one of them specifically, which Ryan Graves describes as a sphere with a cube inside, and each apex of the cube is touching the sphere.
Okay, no, I don't know about that technology.
Okay.
So that's different. I know you can make this appear as it goes in water, but it wouldn't have the shape of a cube. You can make them cigar shape. You can alter it somewhat. And I worked on holography quite a bit, but nothing is detailed.
Holograms?
Yeah, holograms in 3-dimensional space. There's a Japanese company, so I can talk about they use femto pulsed lasers to create touchable holograms, tiny little laser beams that excite the air and in their midpoints, and then create different colors. Even with
now, is this something that they would be able to do
on a massive scale?
100 miles offshore?
Well, that's the thing. I don't think so, but I'm saying they can just create, little orbs and split them up and make them do cool things, and the razzle dazzle, shocking off, act of war.
Right.
And you asked me about Project Bluebeam. Well, that's what it's about, and it involves the voice of God weapons that I was talking about.
Project Bluebeam does.
And this got leaked, so it probably won't have the effect, and they probably won't do it. But if you wanted to bring the world together, as President Reagan said in several UN speeches, you would have a common enemy like evil aliens attacking. We forget our differences and we fight against it. So
we wouldn't look at each other as Chinese or Russian or American. We'd look at each other as Earthlings.
It's humans. Yeah, as Earthlings. And so that was Project Bluebeam, was to trick the human race into believing either God is coming down everybody hears the voice of God, the microwave hearing effect, get along, give, whatever the new message is, or it was going to be the evil aliens attacking. And notice how they, all of a sudden, all the governments release all their information on UFOs, and there's a whole division dedicated, and that's just deception. It's just,
you think it's all deception?
I think it's all deception.
Really?
Yeah. But, that's my opinion. I've looked at all the videotapes and that people have given me, and I can explain away each one of them.
So apparently, but there's apparently lots of footage and videos and photos that have not been released to the public.
Yeah, I haven't seen those, so I can't give.
And if you think this is all some sort of psyop, what do you think the ultimate purpose of it is?
Distraction against a lot of this human experimentation we're doing.
Distraction.
Remember I told you the people I interview, they're actually told we're evil aliens and we're doing this to you. Some of them are.
People that are dealing with something similar.
Exactly.
How many people have you interviewed personally?
2,500, roughly.
2,500.
Yeah. So I have a good sample point of all the trickery they use on their targets.
Now, when you do these interviews, do you sit down in person with all of them?
No, a lot of them over the phone or internet.
Okay.
Some are.
Do you record them?
No, I respect people's privacy immensely, and I always worry.
They don't give you permission to record it?
Some of them do, and I say, no, I'm not leaving any trace that if I'm a little paranoid, but if I get raided, I don't want anyone's name attached to me. That was just my policy, and it's like any good shrink. You keep people's privacy.
So with artificial intelligence, the way it's evolving in the military sector and in the commercial sector, if there's no accountability or transparency for the development of this kind of technology, how is it possible to be optimistic about the future of humanity?
Let's just say this is a catastrophic evolutionary event of the human race. I don't think it can be stopped. There's a weapon system, acronym SATAN, silent assassination through adaptive networks, and that's neural networks, which is artificial intelligence, or social networks. Very complex system, but it's a combination of tactics as well as artificial manipulation. I do not think the future looks good for humans the way we are. Now, you could go the Klaus Schwab way. We genetically engineer everyone to be happy with nothing, or using mind control. We stimulate the 7 pleasure centers of the brain while people work and are productive. And if they're not, we give them a little pain and behavioral modify the human race that way. So they're happy little slaves. I mean, there are a whole bunch of ways this could turn out, but humans will not be the same.
So you're not optimistic about the future of humanity?
No, I'm not. And that's assuming we don't kill ourselves. Nuclear war is looming. It's a very real possibility. Putin might want to take the world with him. It's hard to know what will happen. We have, I don't even know if this is public knowledge, but we have something like 1,300 class 3 pathogenic bioweapons development labs in the U.S. alone. How about another leak like we had in Wuhan, perhaps? I don't know if that.
Yeah, there's so many possibilities. And just getting into the fringe of neuro weapons and lasers is something that boggles my mind. But it seems like nukes are a primitive weapon compared to what we have now.
Yeah, everyone can build a nuke. We monitor the world to make sure they're not. In fact, that's why we got into the war with Iraq, is we had bad intel. We thought they were actually purifying uranium, weapons of mass destruction, etc. That was our justification.
To the public.
Yeah. The CIA denies it and said, no, they told them those parts that they bought were not for purifying uranium or plutonium. Anyway, that's their internal battle. It's a primitive weapon, and no one wants to use them because it destroys buildings, property, stuff. What they want to do is change the people's culture or mind. It's a competition of that. That would be the best weapon. That's why mind-controlled weapons or neural weapons and cognitive weapons are everyone's racing to do. Now, you can still use bullets and bombs, so that destroys buildings as well. You could use a neutron bomb that just irradiates, a dirty bomb that irradiates the city and kills the people, but then it's radioactive for 50 years and unusable. So China said the future wars that they're looking at are going to be biological, viral, mostly, and then robot wars, literally. We have Boston Dynamics. We have they have their equivalent, and these dogs with I'm not making this up, but dogs with laser beams on them and can target. It sounds like an Austin Powers movie, sharks with laser beams on their heads. But machine guns, and they can target very accurately and run about 25 miles per hour. And they're vicious. So war is going to take on a whole new shape for sure.
So the U.S. government has recognized this as a real thing for people, former agents, CIA agents, whatever, former diplomats. They're being taken care of medically for this, and they're being treated, correct?
Correct.
And the problem is no civilians are being treated for us. So two-part question. How are the diplomatic people being treated for it? How is it being recognized? How is the government specifically recognizing them?
So there's a Havana Act that the Congress passed, and they
pull that thing a little bit.
It's published in the Federal Register, and they
turn that light on, Austin.
They listed. They didn't list the diagnostic criteria, but they said that a board-certified neurologist can diagnose it based on these methods: MRI, EEG. Computer tomography. So neurological damage acquired due to hostile activity or something like that. The Havana abbreviation, that's what it stands for. There is no recognition from any government agency that it is happening domestically to either federal employees or civilians. And my case is a perfect example of it. I've been diagnosed. I have the same diagnosis. All the experts recognized it. They're all on the same page. The government would not investigate it, would not recognize it. And if it doesn't recognize it, it wouldn't investigate. It wouldn't protect me. It wouldn't protect other members of the general public. And that's the problem. That's the conversation that we need to have.
What kind of treatment are these former diplomats or former CIA agents getting for this?
As far as I understand, if their active attacks stopped, the treatment is very similar to post-traumatic brain injury. It's basically rehabilitation. In my case, I was recommended vestibular rehabilitation, and it simply doesn't work because I am being attacked every day. So I go to vestibular rehab and they say, "You're worse than last time." I said, "Yeah, because I had several attacks in between." So my attacks are ongoing, and treating it is like putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding wound. It's just not going to happen. It's not helping. I'm getting progressively worse.
But it is helping the diplomats.
We don't know if their attack stopped because the reporting has been very obscure about it. There are some diplomats, for example, Mark Lindsay, him and his family were attacked in China, and then they were attacked in Philadelphia when they came to for treatment at their residence and at the hotel domestically. So overseas and domestically. So there are single cases where the diplomats, the federal employees were attacked both overseas and domestically. The Cuban diplomats, the reporting is rather obscure, but so your guess is as good as mine. I don't know if they stopped or if they continue, but they're receiving some kind of rehabilitation treatment.
Yeah, that would be an incredibly interesting question. I don't have access to those people to find that out, but imagine a knife wound, a stab wound, and you keep turning the knife. There's no way for the brain to heal. There's no way for this psychological scarring from all the breakdown scripts and torture to actually heal, because it's continuous. It's a slow kill weapon in a way.
But the important thing to recognize is that our government has publicly acknowledged that this technology does exist and is being used outside of the United States, at least. They may not be recognizing it. They're recognizing that it's real, right? This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a real weapon that our government has confirmed is being used by either by adversaries or by us against other adversaries, right?
Correct. They have not identified a weapon, but they have identified that it's a real thing from directed energy.
From directed energy. Just, we got to get to the point where they can recognize that it's being used in the domestic, inside our country right now.
Correct. How it's been delivered, who's behind it, why they're doing it, we all need to know. If I'm a non-consensual experimental subject for a newer weapon that's been delivered, which is my really most plausible hypothesis, because I don't see any foreign agents in Bloomingdale, Illinois, driving a van. I mean, obviously, this is not There's happening.
No guy doing a drive-by with holding a satellite dish.
No.
Thank you guys very much for coming on here and talking about this. I really appreciate it, Len and Duncan.
Yeah. And again, thank you for having us. And we want people to look up Havana Syndrome. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, why we're on here. And to ask your politicians to, and news agencies to look deeper into this. And until people are fully aware what Havana Syndrome is, they're not going to understand the public's health issues that could occur. That can happen to Len. It can happen to anybody. And so thank you again, Danny.
And Len, where can people find out more about you specifically and the talks that you do and find more of your work? And the same goes for you.
I'm on Twitter at P Sardonicus. That's my best.
Can you spell that?
PSARDONICUS.
Okay, I'll put a link so people can just click it. It's linked below. And Duncan,
I have my popular book is Project Soulcatcher: Secrets of Cybernetic Warfare Revealed. It can be found on Amazon. I personally am just myself, my private page. If you like my sense of humor or not, you're going to get it. And that's just at Robert Duncan on Facebook, and you'll recognize me. But right now I'm restricted. You know how Facebook does that. If you tell too much truth, or they don't get your sense of humor. So,
all right. Well, thank you guys both very much.
Thank you, Danny.
And sleep tight, everyone.